for this title. And he's got to go to Middlesbrough and get something. And I'll tell you, honestly, I will love it if we beat them. Love it.
Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of The Warm Down today. I'm delighted to be joined by Manchester United youth author and historian Tony Park. Tony, thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
Right, so we're going to talk today about lack of leadership at Manchester United. We've seen Kieran McKenna promoted on the back of a brilliantly successful campaign winning the league with the under-18s. We saw the under-23s relegated. There's not been a change there, which you could agree or disagree with, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of direction in the academy at Manchester United at the moment. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, one of the positives was, given the World Cup situation, so many youngsters went away on the tour, and while they may not have got the game time that it would have been better to see, you still had the likes of Taith Chong, I think, performing and doing very, very well. I thought Jimmy Garner had a really good tournament the times he got out there. I think Mason Greenwood looked, not out of place at all. So in terms of those types of experiences, that's just fabulous to see, regardless of the circumstances.
And it didn't need to take that particular group of players. There was players at the club, James Wilson, Hamilton, possibly Burkhardt. There was players in a slightly older age group that he could have taken, but he chose to take players that are second years or first years on the under-18s, and I think that's a positive thing.
I think so. And so in terms of that direction, I think that's really positive. I also think in terms of the change with McKenna that you mentioned, I think the jury's out on that one. One of the things I always get concerned with is young players respond to coaches, and young players want to work for coaches. So, for example, you might see an under 16-year-old kid, and you can just name one, whoever that might be, like Ollie Denham, for example, in the 16s. He's got elevated to the 18s. He can't wait to work for McKenna with all those older kids telling him in training, yeah, we're winning games, we're performing really well. So there's an excitement when you're moving through the ranks. So I'm just wondering whether we lost the opportunity of keeping some continuity like we had under Paul McGuinness with moving Kieran McKenna on so quickly. On the other hand, it's the first team that really matters at the club. Mourinho wanted someone with talent there, and as a consequence McKenna's got the opportunity to move up, and good luck to him. It would have been really good to see, Steve, us going back out into the marketplace and then saying we had real great success with Kieran coming from Spurs. Who is the next bright young thing out there? Repeat that recruitment
process.
I think so.
What did they do to find McKenna? Let's do that again. Let's go and ask people, who's the guy? If McKenna was the guy last time, because I'm not going to start digging Neil Ryan out. I think he's done all right. The team performed admirably against Liverpool at weekend. I thought that was a massive result for them. It's a very, very fancied Liverpool side with obviously like Bobby Duncan and stuff in the team. Top side. They went there, they beat them there, and they beat them playing some bloody good football as well. So all credit to him for that. I'm not hearing that he's everyone's cup of tea in terms of an appointment, but he's the guy in the chair at the moment. I agree, though, it would have been nice to see some ambition from United, because there's so many areas, first team especially, where you're not seeing ambition, and it would have been nice to see the same sort of ambition that brought McKenna and the success that he brought replicated.
I mean, you don't know, of course. I mean, one of the things as fans is we're never that close to the under-12 coaches or the 13 coaches, and we don't know how good they are. What I will say is that our pedigree in bringing young kids into the first team is second to none. So the coaching at United, clearly there's something going on that's working. The coaching pedigree is clearly there, otherwise we wouldn't be successful. And you rarely hear a lot of negative stuff about the coaching process that those kids go through. So I'm certainly not having a go at any of our current coaches, and as you mentioned with Neil, I'm certainly not saying that he shouldn't be given the opportunity. What I am saying is I think that when you've got a lack of continuity, and it's kind of a contradiction, because you're saying, I'm saying on one hand, there's no continuity, and then Neil gets the job, which is continuity.
Because he's had last year's under 16s.
Absolutely. So I'm kind of contradicting myself a little bit. I suppose it's trying to get that right balance between having a structure at the club where you know where you're going, but also that new blood that says, are we really getting the best coaches in the business? Because otherwise all that happens is, for me, scouting, and we'll talk about scouting if you want, scouting just isn't about scouting players. You want the best administrators behind the scenes, you want the best marketeers doing your marketing, and it seems like we've got the best marketeers out there. You want the best communications organisation at the club. I still think we've got a lot to be desired there. And so when it comes to your critical coaching staff, and I'm talking about critical coaching staff, and the leader of the under-18s is a critical level, the leader of the under-23s as well, you have to ask yourself, have we got the best out there? And if that means we need to go and get them in, then fine. So, as you said, based on the Derby game and the Liverpool game, Neil's got off to a fairly good start. He's got a good bunch of lads there. We've got some new kids coming in from the 16s, so it's always fantastic to see how they perform. We've got a couple of people legacy from last year, such as Mason, Ethan Laird, one or two other players who were exceptional last year.
The difference last year was that for the first time in a long time, first years stepped up. Not just one, because you get one very often, don't you? That's a bit of a standout. That comes in as a first year and blows your socks off. But as a collective, last season you had Jimmy Garner, Laird, Brandon Williams. You had so many people pop in as a first year and just run with it. And now they're second years. I think the pressure is quite rightly on them to deliver some silverware. Like a youth cup run has got to be on with this team. You've got the gem that you've got in Mason Greenwood. You've got some genuine, seriously 5-star potential players in the likes of Ethan Laird and Williams. I think Deshaun Bernard will look fantastic at the weekend. There's obviously others that we haven't seen yet through to injury and stuff like that that come in with some serious talk behind them. We look strong. We look capable of scoring goals against anybody, and I think an FA Youth Cup run has got to be on for us.
And I think the other thing and you mentioned it against Liverpool on Saturday, they were a very physical team. You and I were watching the game, and we were looking at some of the tackles going in, and
the 2 red cards. It was brilliant. It was a great game of football, wasn't it?
It was a good game of football, and it was interesting because Liverpool had apparently beaten Middlesbrough, Sunderland 6-1 or 5-1 or whatever it was the week before. 6-0. 6-0 the week before, and so everyone was talking about we're in for a tough game here. And what you saw was some real leadership on the pitch. You saw some real leadership with the likes of Jimmy Garner. I thought Dylan Levitt, particularly in the first half, got stuck in. He was much more physical than he normally is. So it's a great opportunity for him.
About those socks, though, Dylan.
You had, I thought Ethan Laird was magnificent at the back next to Bernard in terms of his talking and his communication. A real leader.
Him everywhere, can't you?
A real, and that's what you expect. So to see that can only be a positive thing. As I say, what does worry me, and it still worries me from a club perspective, is our recruitment and some of the scouting. And I'm still a little bit concerned with where we're finding, for example, the striker position. We did really well to get Nishan Burkar. I thought Nishan's his first season was okay. He was very lightweight. Last year he had a really good year. He scored a cracking goal for the 23s against Aston Villa when he came off the bench. I think he's got pace. He's got natural goal scoring ability. We need more Burkharts out there, but we don't seem to be getting them, and it's right throughout the club. James Wilson's been injured or on loan the last couple of years. We don't seem to have anybody in that striker role throughout the whole club. And you just wonder what the scouting philosophy is, if you like, about how do we go and get those players. And I know you can't just go to any club and poach people. It doesn't work like that. But there must be a plan or a strategy. Unfortunately, I just don't see it.
I said to you earlier, and I absolutely stand by this, you don't need to be getting 11 Ronaldos on the pitch in your under-23s or potential Ronaldos in your under-23s. It's not about that. But you've got players that you look at that you go, he's a gem, he's a gem. And I'm going to say you've got Chong, you've got Angel, you've got Roshan Williams, Axel Tuanzebe obviously is now on loan. You've got a handful of players in that team where you go, with the right gallant guidance and the right testing and a bit of luck, you've got a top-class footballer in there. And I think that's what the under-23s has lacked massively in recent years, is that balance. I think we were actually a little bit more top-heavy this season than we ever have been. But if you look at some of those later Warren Joyce teams, they had 7 defenders in them and 3 midfielders and a winger. And
that's what I was going about, the scouting and the recruitment. If let's not be, naive here. The administrators at the club, they can look at the 23 players or the 28 players for the reserves, under 23s, under 21s, whatever you call them, and you can say, well, what type of game are we going to play? Because we don't have a striker. Well, we can put Scott McTominay as a striker. I'm sorry, if that's the plan,
it's not acceptable.
If that's the plan, then I get
the idea. These players at that age should still be flexible enough to play in different positions, but some of these are specialist players. Axel Tuanzebe is one of the most natural central defenders I've ever seen. You put him at right back, he looks like a fish out of water. He does not look like a good footballer, but back at centre half, I put him up against anybody in terms of the technical centre half that he is. So some players you can't play a striker in central midfield. They have entirely different roles. You don't play a goalkeeper at left back, do you know what I mean? You've got to, by 23, 21, 22, you should be treating them like that.
And I think there's a subtle difference as well, Steve. I think if you're saying, look, I've got a balanced team here, and I've got a balanced team, and we'll use an example of what Ferguson did with some teams going on. And he says, I've got a balanced team here. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try Paul Ince at fullback. Now he's got one player, a skillful player, a professional player, someone with pedigree behind him, and he's consciously trying him in a role for a specific reason. I've got no issue with that. Similar to playing Januzaj up front or McTominay up front, I've got no issue with that.
Did it with Phil Jones at
Absolutely.
times? Absolutely.
Got no issue with that. But when you're doing it because you've got no choice, and it's not no choice because there's injuries, they've got no choice because there's no other striker, then you have to say to yourself, well, what are you doing to get strikers? Because playing Januzaj and all these people in centre forward.
United hold an open trial and have 10,000 people turn up. If you get one out of that, it was a worthwhile experiment, wasn't it? When you look at the transfer fees that are involved, there is no open trials at Premier League teams. But you think that there must be people that have dropped off the radar. Someone got released at 16. He was having a bit of a knee problem. I fixed my knee. I'm back. That could happen all the time. Who's tracking these players? And like I said, that player doesn't need to be Ronaldo. That player needs to be a striker that's making the runs a striker makes, so that Tahith Chong as a winger can develop his game as a winger. And you don't see a Manchester United side getting relegated a couple of years after they've been champions.
Well, I mean, that's another story, and I think, whether or not people think Ricky Spraggia, if we talk about the under-23s for a second, and I think it's mixed. I mean, I go on a lot of the internet forums and I go on social media quite a bit, and it's mixed. Some people are saying he's clearly not good enough, yet he was good enough in 2005.
Yeah, he's won titles.
He won numerous titles, and in the 2005 team they won the Pontins Premier League League, they won the Pontins Cup, they won the Barclays Premier Reserve League, the Manchester Senior Cup. It was a clean sweep.
That's only a game though, isn't it, usually? It's usually one game for us.
But the point was he suddenly a bad manager then? No, he wasn't. Well, what was the difference? Well,
PK, Rossi.
He had PK, Rossi, Fraser Campbell. He had a whole bunch of exceptionally good players in that side. Paul McShane at centre half, and so on and so forth. You had an exceptionally good bunch of talent that you can work with. Well, if you've got the talent, then of course you can win things. Spraggia has taken over when, as you say, Warren Joyce was playing with 7 defenders, and 2 wingers and no one up front, and did a bloody good job with what he had.
He did do a good job with what he had.
But it was always going to be. I always ask the question: Did he see it coming and thought, it's going to get worse next year because I've got even less attacking options? And we even had our fullbacks were so poor that he put Demi Mitchell, one of our more attacking, exciting forwards, played him as a fullback. Not because they thought, well, we're lacking fullbacks, but because he thought we need somebody in that position who can do a job because no one else is doing the job. And you just think to yourself, is it Spraggia? Is it the recruitment? Personally, I think
that's 23 level as well. You're dealing with your best players are going to go on loan.
Yep.
Fact. And then you're going to deal with a lot of lads that have come in from the under-18s, which it's a weird age group. Now, I think the genesis of the age group being under-23s and moving it up from 21s was because they was like, there's far too many players getting shifted on in that 2-year bracket, the 22 and 23-year-olds, and the average age of a Premier League debut is 23. But we've said before, if at 22 you've not made your debut for Manchester United, guess what, mate? If I'm looking at some players there now that everybody that's just left the under-18s, enjoy this season, find your feet in this level at this season, but if you're there next season or the season after and you've not been on loan, like Axel Tuanzebe nearly fell into that trap. Now he got a loan last season, was a bit mixed bag. He started this year like an absolute house on fire. That's the model that you want to be following. You don't want to be 22, 23, just happy to play under 23s at United, because you are going to come out and you're going to go quite a long way down before you find your feet again.
It's a complex thing, Steve, because what you've got, and I looked at the league table this season, right? We've got 22 games. That's it, 22 games.
23s this is, brother.
23s. We've got 22 games in the under-23 league. And I know there's some cup games on top of that.
The Premier League Cup, where you play a lot of international teams.
Well, I know. So we've got 20. It's a league system with 22 teams. We've got 6 players out on loan, which leaves us with a group of 23 players. Those 23 players are going to play 2 times a week for the next 9 months.
A month.
2 times a month. 2 times a month. So if you are one of those 23 players and you're not in the squad of 16, because there's no 18s in the squad, it's 16 in the squad, that means you have to hope that you're going to get in the squad for the second game that month. And if you don't, because we're under pressure, the Sprazia was under a lot of pressure not to get relegated, so you're not going to play, those fringe players. You're going to be hopefully playing your best players. How do those players develop? They're nowhere near good enough to go on loan yet, because they haven't developed the physicality to be an adult, because they're 19 years old. Sorry, they just turned 18, so they're too young for the under 18s. But they're 19 and they're nowhere near 21, 22, 23. Milan Bars is a good example. Milan Bars now is in the under 23s. He can't even get on the bench. How's that kid going to develop? Then you've got to worry about his motivation. You've got to worry about his confidence, because he's not getting any games. I mean, that's not fair to the kid.
No.
We're not arranging any friendlies. I mean, the friendlies.
It's a 5-year age group.
It's crazy, and we organise other games against other academy teams. You're not going to learn anything from doing that. Years ago we'd be playing Salford City, or we'd be playing Rossendale United, or whoever we'd be playing.
Used to play Maine and Marine a lot.
Yeah, and we used to, and you ask any of the lads who used to play in the A team. The old Lancashire League, playing against Crewe, Alexandra and Rochdale and Oldham Reserves and Marine and some of Morecambe, they were kicked from pillar to post. Now, I'm not suggesting that's the model to go to. What I am suggesting is, and it's been all over the internet.
Dark arts that you get against those. That 32-year-old centre-half that maybe played League One for 5 years. He's going to teach an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old Nishan Burkhardt. He's going to teach him something that Nishan's got to figure out, and that's going to grow his game.
And also, when the young kids are taking the mick, Paul McGuinness, talks a lot at the moment about intimidation through skill. I mean, you want to see those I'd like to see Milan Bars against some hairy-assed, Salford City defender taking the mick out of them.
Yeah.
Now, I know you've got to be careful, because you don't want the injuries. I get that. It's a fine line between the two of them. But it just, and we go back to the word leadership, I just don't see a plan or a strategy for how to manage those 23 players. None of them are going to get enough game time. Maybe a handful. I don't know what the challenge is in terms of how do we get those players the loans they need. We've got a loan system at the moment, for me, doesn't seem to be working either.
There's no link-ups.
There's no link-ups with the likes of whoever, whether they're an Antwerp type organisation in Europe, whether they're a college system type organisation in the USA, or whatever, or even we're sending them to Scotland. I mean, what did one of the tweets say on Twitter about the England squad in Russia this year?
Yeah, I tried to find it before we came on, actually, because I think that would have been a good one. But anecdotally, we can go, actually, if you go through that England squad that featured for England this year, from Kyle Walker to Harry Maguire to Jamie Vardy, I don't think Sterling played down there, but there was I think Harry Kane did.
Danny Welbeck
so
did.
Many of them played in the Championship.
And learnt their trade there. So if we're going to be sending our kids anywhere, we should be really pushing in very strong terms with those clubs.
Put yourself in the boots of a chairman from a Championship club, and they go, listen, I'm phoning from Manchester United. I'm Nicky Butt. I'm head of youth development at Manchester United. I'd like to have a season by season deal with you guys. What we'll do is we'll do a friendly at your gaff just at the end of pre-season, so you get a big bump in attendance and you can do whatever. And we're going to send you 3 of our lads on loan every single season. We'll give you the pick, and then we'll discuss them, because you're not just going to take whoever, but we'll give you the option to pick which guys you need as your positions, or we'll give you 5, you pick 3.
Sure.
And every season you know that you're going to get 3 of the top draw Manchester United, the ones that those 5-star potential players, like that might have been Chong. Let's pick a random Championship side at the moment and go, right, you put Chong in there, squad member, not first team player, squad member. There's no obligation to play them, but there's an expectation they're given opportunity. You take in Roshan Williams or Axel Tuanzebe. You maybe take Ethan Hamilton. Those players are going to add to your squad, if not your first team.
Well, I mean, you've got to be careful. What you have to be careful is that you don't turn a Derby County or a Sheffield United or an Aston Villa into a mini Man United. I mean,
no, they've got to have their identity.
Yeah, you've got to be careful, and that's always going to be very difficult for the home supporters to be watching our players play for their club. So it's all about balance. But what I agree with you is I think there's got to be a plan, and there doesn't seem to be a plan. It always amazes me when you look at I never get sucked into the whole Derby transfer deadline day thing. But what always amazes me is that why is it at 11 o'clock on the last day, Matty Willock suddenly's got his deal with St Johnston or Kilmarnock or whatever.
Why July wasn't the time for that?
I just don't understand any of that. That should have been. They know.
Should have been end of the season.
Correct. That's my point. They should know in May. They should know in May and June. The kids are going to come back from their couple of weeks break. They know who's going to go on the summer tour with the first team, theoretically, because how many they're going to do.
Well, we did.
We did. Exactly. It's not hard to work out. So you look at someone like Ethan Hamilton, who's a good example. So you might be saying, right, Ethan Hamilton, it's his first year in the under-23s. What's the plan with Ethan? Are we going to give him a whole year?
Is this Nicky Butt that sits down with him and tells him, the plan with you, mate, is going to be you play under-23s football for the next 3 seasons? He'd be like, cool, I'm going to pack my shit, because that's not acceptable. Where is this coming in? I was saying, but also going back to the frequency of games, how do you prepare for playing at Old Trafford on a Saturday or a Sunday, playing in the Champions League on a Wednesday, playing at Old Trafford again the following Saturday, if you're only playing once every 2 weeks?
Or here's another one for you. How do you prepare for that when you're playing behind the closed doors friendlies amongst coaching staff from both sides against Rangers or whatever we're doing, in silence, with no supporters allowed? And forget. I'm not talking about that from a supporting perspective. I'm saying why isn't it in bigger stadia? As I say, Salford City got 3,500. FC United get 3,000 regularly. Put them in those types of small stadium with lots of people around them, with lots of energy.
This is where you're going to be playing your trade.
And the sidelines, people are giving you a bit of jip. I'm not saying I'm right, and I'm not saying I have all the answers. What I'm questioning is I'm questioning what comes across as a lack of plan. There seems to be a lack of planning with the scouting, because I haven't seen for any evidence in 6 years of good, young, bright strikers coming into the club. I just don't see it. I don't see any plan with the international scouting. I mean, we've had the likes of Josh Doherty, and I've got nothing against Josh. We got him in and then didn't play him.
Well, there's a group at the moment, isn't it, that are a pretty top draw, but it seems scattergun. It doesn't seem like there's this every single season coming in. Like, there wasn't really anyone that came in this season to the level of, like, in previous seasons we had Burkhardt, we had Chong, we had Leo Connor, we had those guys coming in.
But what's really interesting, you name those players. Those players were an Irish international at youth level, a Dutch international at youth level, a Swiss international at youth level, and Where's the next ones of those? I don't see it.
No, that's what I mean. There is none. No. I'm not hearing of those. We've signed Masny, who's got, as a goalkeeper, who's got a little bit of a decent rep. There's a Polish centre half, Bejga, who's injured at the moment. He might be one of those. We haven't seen him yet. That's a 16-year-old first year that we've got in. There might be more of these in there, but there was a lot of noise coming about Burkhardt and about Chong and about Leo Connor way before they arrived. So when they arrived, you was kind of like, let's see what this is about, and then they all delivered.
Well, they have delivered, and because they're quality, and that goes back to my previous point. Why did we wait so long to start to invest in that? And that's that lack of planning, or what comes across in perception as a lack of planning. Because when we get it right, we get it right.
Top, though, because there's this level of lack of planning going on in the first team. Now, Jose Mourinho is on the receiving end of a lot of stick for the style of play of the football team at the moment, but I almost sympathise with the guy, because he's being asked to build a house without a roof. He's just delivering him more and more doors and saying, just put the doors on there, they're fine. Like, I think we can't fully judge Jose Mourinho until Jose Mourinho was able to get his team and his vision, and Ed Woodward being the guy that's saying, well, you've got centre-halves. It's like, well, obviously they're not good enough, otherwise I wouldn't be asking for more, would I? And I think that is a symptomatic issue of what's going on everywhere in the club. We seem to be far too reactionary rather than pre-planning. We don't seem to be putting things in place like a tie-up like we had with Antwerp, which was incredibly successful, which would on paper seem like the easiest thing in the world to resurrect. We closed the women's team, we resurrect the women's team. Now, there actually does seem to be a bit of planning going into the women's team. It seems like we've got a Premier League team playing in the First Division. We're expected to go and absolutely smash people. Why isn't that level of ambition, and why isn't that level of planning going into every aspect of the club? The major aspects of the club, which, let's be honest with ourselves, is the first team, 23s and 18s, in that order. Why isn't that ambition there? Why has no one gone, I want the best 11 on the pitch for the first team? Why is no one saying, I want the best 20-year-olds and under? Because let's be honest, if you're 22, 23, as we've said, it ain't happening for you at United. And then again, in the under-18s, I love going, I think we spoke about this last week, actually. One of the reasons I love watching the under-18s is it gives me that sort of sense of what I imagine watching football 50, 60 years ago was, where it isn't that life and death, everything is horrendous when it dies, or it's, we watched them draw against Derby and we was like, it was a good game.
It was a good game, and it's interesting you say that, because what it allows you to do is it allows you to actually look at what's going on and enjoy it for what it is, with the sense of perspective. So, we talk about the Derby game, and there was a couple of mistakes by the defenders, and they cost us 2 goals.
Passing it back to the goalkeeper, I'm not a fan of.
Well,
I was saying it all the way through the game, and then
regardless of who those people were, there was a couple of mistakes. Those kids are going to learn from that. The people on the sideline, of course, we're disappointed it happens, but you hope that the coaching staff are going to pull them to the side and say, look, here's what we're trying to do. Keep doing this, but be careful of that. However they go about their coaching process, and we hope that's the case. My concern is that this lack of leadership, or lack of direction, or lack of strategy, I don't care what words you want to use, there's going to come a point in time where it's going to have a knock-on effect. And then what will happen is, for those kids coming through, and again, I'll say this as I said at the beginning, we still have the best record of bringing kids through. We're still giving kids a chance in the first team, as we have done. It's pretty exciting with the likes of Chong and Greenwood and 2 or 3 others that hopefully in the League Cup, or some of the opportunities they're going to get this season, fingers crossed, touch wood, that will still happen. But what I see, if they're not given the right experiences in that gap between the 18s and the 23s, if that's not looked after, and I just don't see any change. The FA changes the FA changes the rules every year, so they haven't got a clue. There's no leadership at the FA. No. They don't know what they're doing. They change the league. Every year they change the league and change the rules. So either they got the wrong person in the job, or they don't know what they're doing, and either way, it's a complete cluster, right? The next word. It's just, I don't understand it at all.
Crunchy nut was the next word.
And they keep changing the league system. They keep changing, playoffs and the number of games. And it must be so frustrating for people at all the academies to say, what are the FA going to do, or Barclays Premier League, what are they going to be doing next? So there's a huge gap there with lack of leadership there. There's a lack of leadership, I think, or a lack of strategy or planning at United about what to do with those kids, because it doesn't seem planned. It seems, as you say, incredibly reactive, leaving it until 11 o'clock on transfer deadline day to get some kid a loan up in St Johnston. It doesn't make sense.
It's a key development age, which I've read an article on it several years ago, and it just gets proven more and more correct every single year that goes by. And it was between the ages of 17 and 21. Elite, I'm not even sure it was football that the article was talking about, but elite athletes need exposure to top level competition, and top level competition could still be defined as championship, because it's a top 10 European league, really. They need essentially first team competitive competition, it was, rather than elite. It needs competitive exposure between 50 and 100 times. That's their rookie period. And then there was like a big bell curve of players who get X number of games will go on and have this in their career. It was weird because Marcus Rashford's got to be aware of this, because he's 125 games for United now at 20. He is in the wrong end of the bell curve, where players at that age can actually burn out and not have the longevity. Ryan Giggs is the complete opposite of that, but he did play a hell of a lot of games at that age. Wayne Rooney played a lot of that games, and you might be seeing that now.
What was significant with that was Giggs actually played quite a lot of games at reserve level. Rashford skipped the reserves.
Almost, yeah, he played twice at 21 level.
Yeah, so the equivalent of. So as a consequence, it's a very interesting set of data, and I don't disagree at all. And
it's weird, it was just this big chunk of players that are between 50 and 100 matches from 17 to 21. That's the meat of where you go and be a successful.
And if you think about this logically, Steve, forget football just for a second. Every person learns a lot between 17 and 21. You learn, emotional intelligence. You learn about what's it like living in an adult world. You learn about how do I bounce back from mistakes. There's a lot of emotional resilience going on. Well, you're not going to learn a lot of emotional resilience sitting on a bench, or emotional resilience playing vanilla football in the under-18s. You have to go and test yourself. And what you have to do, and there's been lots of stuff on Twitter saying you have to play above your grade. You know, those kids who have been exceptional were the kids who are playing 2 and 3 years above themselves, playing against older lads, you know, wanting to compete, and they learn that grit, that determination, that stuff that, you know, go back to Brighton on the weekend, we lacked a little bit of, you know, fight, determination, you know, whatever you want to call it.
We lacked a lot.
But I think what upset a lot of United fans was the response. I don't think, you know, no one goes out and wants to lose. Those players didn't go out there on Sunday and said, we're going to decide to lose today and we're 3-1 down, so we're going to give up. They didn't do that. It just didn't work. But what you didn't see was that resilience, you know, that natural resilience, and that comes down to leadership. You know, who was the leader on the pitch? And that's the bit that I'm talking about with, you know, today with this review, is I don't see it just at first level. I see it throughout the whole club. I see there's a real lack of leadership. Now, when I say leadership, I'm not talking about individuals here. I'm just talking about an overarching issue that says who's in charge, what's the plan, what's the strategy, what are we planning to do in terms of approach, you know, all of those things combined, and then the communication around it so everyone's clear. Because if you said, is anybody really clear what's going on? No one has a clue. And that's the lack of clarity, I think, then makes a lot of these debates very interesting, because we're kind of talking without a lot of you know, data, because it's all guesswork. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
But that's sad, isn't it? Because you think projects. Obviously, I spent a long time in the army. I am a bad stickler for writing down tasks and goals, and I find that really helps in achieving them. How do I know I did that? Well, I ticked it off. I like tasks and checking off tasks. Where's the planning at United? Like we saw. Yeah, all right, we saw over $1 billion or so investment in Manchester City. But with a team of Manchester United's pedigree, why are we still playing matches in Leigh? Why do I have to drive all the way to Leigh to go and watch 23's football? Why is that not at Barton Stadium, Salford City? There might be political reasons for that, but there's enough stadiums in Manchester without even buying their own or funding their own, which surely costs nothing. You know, there's so many things that this club could do that they don't do. For years, they didn't even acknowledge we had supporters in Manchester. You see them putting these fan events on for people all around the world. There's never been one in Manchester. There's like a real bizarre disassociation, and you've seen in a lot of aspects Manchester City have cleaned that up. The thing that they did at the bottom Mancunian way with Mancini annoyed the piss out of everyone. Got to respect it. Some of the graffiti guerrilla art that they did all over the city, this city is ours, that sort of stuff, hate it. Got to respect it. United sort of sleepwalking into an absolute disaster. Like, people are thinking, let's take the piss out of Arsenal, let's take the piss out of Liverpool. We're about to become them. We are about to become them, and all we've got to cling to is the fact that we've got a top academy on the side of it.
Well, that's my overarching point. I have this fear that at the moment we're getting kids in the youth team. Chelsea's won the Youth Cup the last 5 years in a row. Okay, no one's coming through. So, you know, what's the point? But, you know, we've been able to win Youth Cups and get kids through. You know, we've been able to be successful and do that with a 50% of every single first team player.
224 in it now? Is it 448?
448, yeah. So exactly 50% of every single first team player to come into our first team since World War II has come through our academy. I mean, no other club is anywhere near that stuff. So when people say, well, you know, it's all very well you know, talking about kids when your first team's not winning. Well, our whole history has been built on both. So why can't you be built on both? You know, you've got Newcastle United as an example, have won virtually nothing in 50 years. And they won't have a youth system. They've got one of the worst youth systems in the league.
It actually blows my mind how someone like Newcastle, you think, what is a Newcastle fan want? You want to stay up? Is that existence? Why don't they? I've said this for a while, like when transfer fees are now getting to the 150, 200, 300 million pound mark, at what point do you go, I'm not playing that game? But I just the game I'm playing.
I mean, but that's the point. I'm worried that if we don't recognise it now, and I just don't see the evidence. Maybe they are. Maybe I'm doing an incredible disservice to everybody behind the scenes, you know, Murtar and Nick Cox and all these people, and Nicky. Maybe I'm doing an incredible disservice and the whole thing's planned out. Maybe the whole thing is totally logical.
From a PR perspective, they're not telling us it is.
Well, that's one thing, and maybe it's just a communication issue. But you know, I just don't see the evidence. And the evidence is, I don't see the kids coming through in terms of a structured process. not coming through the system, but in terms of the scouting, I don't see that as a structured process. The loan doesn't seem to have any planning around it whatsoever. And thirdly, you know, the Youth Cup, we've been knocked out at the opening rounds 3 times since we won it in 2011. We've got to the 5th round twice, and we've been knocked out in the first hurdle 3 times, and we've got beaten 5-1 by Chelsea, you know, and in the second hurdle on one of those occasions as well, which cost, you know, theoretically cost Paul McGuinness his job. So, you know, we've had a terrible record at Youth Cup level, which has always been the benchmark for our club in terms of, you know, winning the FA Youth Cup. I know it's just one trophy, I know it's not the be-all and end-all, but it still matters and it's still important. And so clearly Chelsea's got their scouting right, clearly they've got their coaching right, and clearly they've got their infrastructure right, and City too to a large extent. There's
a lot of talk that both City and Chelsea recruit larger players, and that's the one thing they're going for, and they're both teaching systematically, which is obviously going to allow tactical and team performances to improve, whereas United focus on the individual. And as you said, when you look at the numbers that are coming through from 2 incredibly successful youth team sides in City and Chelsea versus who's coming into the first team, and even what they're doing at youth international and first team international level, United's method can't be discounted. You can't discount their method either, at all. But you can't discount the method that Manchester United are doing, which I think a lot of people like to do.
The only thing I'd do is to caveat and say, yes, Mourinho has continued to play Rashford, he's continued to play Lingard, which weren't his players. I mean, Van Gaal's brought them through. He's given McTominay a chance, which is fabulous. I'm really chuffed for Scott, and you know, every time he's turned up, he's done exactly what he's been asked to do. He's done his job, which is fantastic. But you know, the Timothy Fosu-Mensah, there's a lot of talk about why isn't he? You know, I don't see anything wrong in giving him. He's certainly, in my opinion, no worse than our other right back choices.
Game against Spurs at weekend as well.
I mean, now go back to we don't have a Rio or a Vidic next to him, coaching him and talking. I remember talking to Danny Simpson, you know, some years ago when he played right back. And he was young, and Fergie gave him half a dozen games. And he said that Rio just talked him through, coached him through the whole game. Well, unfortunately, when you've got Lindelof and Bailly, you know, struggling themselves to get through the game, they're not going to be in a position to coach him. So you kind of then say, well, you know, unfortunately, is he going to really get a chance at the club? You know, is he? Pereira's come back in, and he had a couple of great seasons in Spain, and people have been asking for him to be given a chance. He had a very good game against Leicester, I thought. He has a bad game against.
I'm terrified that he's been made the scapegoat.
That's my point. He has an average game against Brighton, along with everybody else, and he's the one being pulled. And you just think to yourself, you know, Mourinho's might be talking talking a great talk about giving youth a chance, but you know, Josh Harrop scored a fantastic goal in his debut. He was sold. Demi Mitchell's not seen the sight of the first team since, you know, 2 seasons back. Matt Olosunde obviously has been injured, and he's not seen sight of it. Tuanzebe's not been near the first. I'm just wondering whether Mourinho's now going to be, you know, buying even more players, and all that does is take up more space. I just have this concern that we're going to be seeing less of the academy.
He's walking the walk more than any others.
Yes, he is. But
in a changing landscape. But I would love the club to be able to implement something akin to the philosophy that you see at Bilbao, because it blows my mind how they're able to not just to compete, but to thrive with the self-imposed restrictions that they've got for players that have either come through their own academy or brought up in that area. And I'm not asking for that, but I wouldn't be upset if we said 5 players from every single matchday squad have to be our own grown. Imagine the pride of having that, and because
there's no argument with that, and I think we've always done that. As you know, the statistics show that we've always done that. I think what we mustn't do is we mustn't have a statistics driving our selection policy. If they're not good enough, I'd rather have a bought player in there than a youth player who's not good enough. I just don't think that we need to worry about it. I think that as long as we do the right things behind the scenes, we'll always have good youth players, because we always have had.
I know October is the 80th anniversary of the last time we didn't have an academy graduate in the squad. I would like it enshrining in club. I know you're saying that, yes, it's great that it's been done on merit up until this point. Well, you can't reset 80 years of history. I'd like it put as a caveat of the squad now, a club rule.
Well, I think, don't get me wrong, I think the current manager and the future manager, that they're aware of that statistic. It's been on the club website and all the rest of it. And I think they're under a lot of pressure not to that no one wants to be the manager that breaks that. But again, it's just a statistic, and I'd rather win the game without one, if that makes sense, or win a league without one than to have one in there purely because you have to. But I don't think it needs to do that. I think that if we do the right things like we have done historically, we can continue having a strong core of youth through the first team. As I say, I'm just a little bit concerned that I don't see the planning and the strategy and certainly the leadership around communication and stuff allowing us to be confident that that's happening. And I guess that's why we're chatting about this stuff today, because there's questions, there's question marks, and that leads us into the first team as well. Yeah, there are questions. I'm going to wrap it up there, but Tony, thank you very much for joining me. This is great as usual. Go check him out on Twitter at Mr. Mujak. We'll throw a link to that in the description, and also to his book as well, Sons of United, which is definitely worth checking out. And if you want to know why United do have the history and the heritage of bringing through academy and everything that it represents, this is Manchester United. And it needs to continue as far as I'm concerned. But thank you for joining us, Tony. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Give it a like if you've enjoyed it, subscribe if you're new, and we will see you in the next one. Laters.